Number 1.
A few miles from where I live is a country park. It is a lovely place with a wide range of different trees, plants, and wildlife. People often picnic there, take children to play in the woodland playgrounds, or simply to explore. It has even been nicknamed Little Switzerland by locals because of its clay cliffs, which are dotted around the place. These cliffs mean that the park is on a multitude of different levels. Some are accessible via slopes and steps, but some are not. It is on one of these inaccessible cliff tops where we were witness to something we could not explain. Almost 2 years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take an afternoon trip to this country park. We had been at university all morning and wanted to be outdoors for the remainder of the day. It was an unplanned trip, but we hoped to walk around the woods and have a late dinner at the country inn. We must have been walking around the park for about an hour or so, exploring the woods, identifying birds, and enjoying our surroundings. We had reached a quarry situated in the middle of the park. It had flooded a considerable amount of the area, so we walked further around than we may have had it not been flooded. I had previously visited the country park a number of times, and I remembered seeing what looked like the remains of a huge old house on one of the largest cliff tops. I knew my girlfriend would find this as interesting as I did, so I made an extra effort to find it. We eventually reached a gravel pathway at the foot of the highest cliff. There was no way up without climbing equipment, but it winded around the cliff's perimeter, thus enabling us a perfect view of the above remains. We must have only walked this path for 10 minutes, if that, and I saw what I had been looking for. The remains included an old brick wall on the very edge of the cliff top, and what looked like brick archways with wrought iron bars and no windows. It does not really resemble a house anymore, but I have reason to believe it was at least part of the grounds, which I will explain later. I walked a few feet ahead of my girlfriend, so I could point up to where these remains were, as they were pretty well hidden amidst the trees. I turned to look at my girlfriend for a split second, before looking back to where I was pointing, and it was in that moment I saw it. Exactly in line with where I was pointing was something I can only explain as a creature. It was on a natural edge created in the cliffside, just feet below the remains we had searched for. The ledge was overgrown with ivy and the odd tree here and there. It was very green up there, and this made what I saw contrast with its surroundings quite considerably. It was a creamy peach color, and it looked like the shape of a head, but it had no redeeming features. Although describing this reminds me of how scared I was looking at it. It is the way it moved which made my blood run cold. It seemed to be lying down, peering over the edge of the ledge I described. It must have been looking at me, because when I turned my head back to where I was pointing, it moved backwards into the overgrowth. It did not move like a human. It skulked back effortlessly. Like I said earlier, it was impossible to get up there without climbing equipment, and if anyone was up there, you would see them, despite the overgrowth, as the ledge was not that big. Also, if a person was hiding and peering over the edge, their facial features would have been more than visible. This did not have any, or at least it appeared not to. Not to mention that most people would probably have moved in a clumsy manner, and would have still been visible. Whatever was up there was not fazed by me seeing it. It moved with confidence, and with a slow movement it faded away into the ivy. It looked like it may have been slightly bigger than a human being, another reason why any facial features should have been visible from that distance. It was not a silhouette of anything, not what I would describe as a ghost, or entity. I could see it as clear as day. But it was not human, or like any animal I have ever seen. Needless to say, I immediately asked my girlfriend if she had seen what I had, but she did not. I described what I had seen, and we both fled the woods as fast as we could. We had to carry on walking the same gravel path as it was enclosed between the cliff and sloping woodland. This left me startled and intrigued. I had been to the country park a number of times before, and never encountered anything like that. I decided to do a spot of research, and I found some articles about an old house called The Cliff in this country park. There was only ever one person living there, and they were explained as having a split personality, both a woman and a man. They are rumored to have spent their time drawing pictures and hanging them on the gate to their property, for passers-by to see. Another house was also explained, which sounds very much like the remains I described, even the location. An old gate to a huge garden is supposedly hidden in the ivy on that very cliff top. It is said to lead to an old period house, which was once an orphanage. Has anyone ever seen anything like the creature I saw?
Number 2.
The other night, I was hanging out with my friend. Let's call her Helen. My friends and I usually always get together on the weekends to socialize and travel the city. It is a normal thing for us. After our weekend school, we get to relax and have some fun with each other. Normally, it is a group of about 4 to 5 people, but every once in a while, someone can't hang out because they have to do something else. But this weekend, no one can hang out except for Helen and I. I was alright with that. It was just a little weird because Helen and I haven't hung out much alone together. Anyway, we met up around 6 p.m. We walked around for a bit until it was pretty dark. We went to her home and she ate dinner. And we didn't really have anything to do. We decided to just sit in her room and talk. So we did. We sat in her bed and listened to music for a very long time, not doing anything. We were just enjoying the music. We got to talking about a lot of things. Things such as vibes, religion, evil spirits, and different energy types. I like to talk about these kinds of things for some reason. They're just so intriguing to me. I'm sure you can relate. And whenever I find someone else who likes to talk about these kinds of things, it makes me pretty excited. I also consider myself to be a very spiritually sensitive person. I've always thought that I can see a little bit more than what is actually there. This is just what I've come to believe as I get older. And I've been raised to believe that I'll be able to see spirits and communicate with them. As this night went on, we were getting pretty tired, anxious, and just plain bored. She was texting her boyfriend, and he was acting kind of weird. It was causing her to become a little distraught. I didn't think it was much because I usually don't pay attention to other people's relationship problems. And I guess I thought it just wasn't a big deal. He then proceeded to tell us that he took a bunch of mushrooms, and that he gets lost when he does them, which kind of confused and frightened us a bit. We were trying to apply tons of different meanings to what he meant when he said that he gets lost. It weirded us out a bit, but it still wasn't that big of a deal to us. We were just surprised that he was alone, because both of us have done mushrooms in the past, and we know what they can do to a person, especially if that person is alone. Being alone on them is just a big no-no. I'm sure some of you may know this. Some people may prefer to be alone, but not the majority. So after he texted us that he gets lost whenever he does mushrooms, he didn't answer after Helen called him over and over again. She went on Facebook and messaged him and texted him again and again, because, yes, we were a bit nervous that he took a bunch of mushrooms while he was alone, especially since now he isn't answering anyone. There was a part of me that just wanted to shrug this off and just think his phone died and he fell asleep or something along the lines of that. But for some reason I had this bad feeling. I kept getting mental imagery of bad things happening to him, and so did my friend Helen. We shared that we both had a bad feeling about the situation to each other, so I convinced her that we'd go check on him. It was kind of a wild and crazy idea at first, since he has roommates, and if we just knocked on the door at about 12 at night, it might be a little weird. Plus he lived on the other side of town than we did. He lived in a pretty bad area of town, an area known for its crime rates and drug use. But we made our decision. We were going to check on him. So we drove about 15-ish minutes until we got to his house. We parked in front of his house. It was a pretty huge house from the early 1900s or something. That's how most of the houses in that area are. Big and old. We just stared at the house, contemplating if we should get out. We still couldn't really believe we drove all the way over without his consent in the middle of the night. So yes, we were nervous to go up to the door and knock. We looked at all the windows in the house, only one of them had light on in the room, and it was his room. So Helen was just staring at his window, very hard. I didn't get why she was looking so hard at the window. At this point, neither of us were afraid. We were fine. She told me it looks like he was in the window staring at us, and so I looked. I saw a weird pattern on his window. I knew it wasn't a person. At first I didn't really know what it was, but there was a film of water-like substance over his window. It looked like it was glowing or reflective. I was just in awe. I asked her what she thought it was, and she said she didn't know, but it was moving, like it was alive. It was shaking and morphing and bubbling. It was kind of gross looking. It began to scare us a lot as we began to realize that we were witnessing something paranormal. We thought that it could have been a manifestation of negative energy, going to her boyfriend in his room, and we were just watching it flow in. It was the strangest thing. It's as if the stuff was reacting to stimulus. like there was a force moving and controlling it. I don't know how to really explain it. At this point, we were afraid. We didn't know if we should go into the house if there was negative energy in it. We both began to get short of words because of how afraid we were. Then at the corner of my eye, I noticed a red flashing light. I stopped moving instantly and stared at it. It was in between two houses where it was very dark. There was probably about 50 feet between the houses. It's as if it was trying to get my attention, and it did. It surprised me at first, because it was very noticeable. Helen noticed that I was staring at something and decided to look where I was looking. We both were describing what we were seeing out loud, and it was matching up. We were both seeing the same thing. Let me explain to you what we saw. Right under the red light there was a childlike figure. It was the size of a child, except it was extremely skinny. It seemed as if it was kind of shiny, just like what we seen on the window, yet extremely dark. Darker than what we know is dark. It was doing something though. She described that it looked like it was playing, while I thought that it was eating. Whatever it was, we were watching it. I remembered the feeling of complete terror that came over me. I immediately knew what we were looking at, and so did she. I remember how my heart just dropped into my stomach. I felt an intense anxiety inside of me while I was watching this. It was so frightening. I wish I could explain in words how much fear was pumping through my veins in that moment. There was no explanation to what it was. It was no type of animal, and it most certainly was not a human. It gave off a feeling of pure evil and filth. It was moving as if it knew what it was doing, like it was smart. The thing that made this so weird was where we saw it. It was in the complete darkness. Why would something be in the darkness right there? What would it be doing? It seemed as if it was also giving off its own light a little. It looked vicious, it looked mean, it looked rabid. Yet it still looked like a person. It stood up on its 2 feet, and it was walking around a bit. It seemed extremely angry, or extremely hyper. I then told Helen to turn on the car, and that we need to go now, in a very serious tone, before it noticed that we were there. She scrambled for her keys, turned on her car, and we sped off as fast as we could. I did not take my eyes off of the thing. I was just waiting for it to charge, or disappear, but it didn't. As we drove away, I even saw it from different angles. It didn't ever acknowledge that we were there, though. Thank God. We were both silent and pale as we drove away from the house. We didn't say a word. We were frozen with our fear. She drove a few blocks away to a McDonald's and parked in the parking lot and looked at me. She said, "We need to talk about what we just saw." We were both shaken up and just speechless. We tried to comprehend what just happened, but it's like we just couldn't. We didn't even want to believe what we saw. I remember just sitting there. I could still see that thing in my mind. It was real. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't a game. What we had just seen wasn't real life. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I got. She explained to me that we need to go back because her boyfriend is on mushrooms and is vulnerable, with that thing near him. It all began to make sense. The thing was probably there for her boyfriend. When you do mushrooms, your mind opens up. A lot. It can make your mind extremely vulnerable to the spirit world, especially to people who don't know what they're doing. The thought of being alone with that thing frightened me so badly, and that's just what her boyfriend was doing. I decided that I would wait at McDonald's while she went back and tried to get in the house. As I was getting out of the car, I just decided I had to go. I couldn't make her do that alone. I needed to face this situation. This was a complete test of my faith. I was so scared. I didn't want to go back with all my heart, but we couldn't leave him there, so we decided to go back. I took my cross necklace off and held it in my hand, squeezing it. We decided to walk to his house since it was fairly close to where we were. The neighborhood was so dead, it was so dark. All the houses were huge and falling apart. Some of them the paint was peeling off. It just wasn't a pretty sight. As we were getting closer to his house, the negative feelings were building up more and more. My heart was just racing. I had my hood on and my head down, because I didn't want to see anything. When we got next to the house, we felt this cold breeze. It was not a windy night, but a huge whoosh of wind just slammed into us. It just gave us the feeling like we were not wanted in this area. We were right in front of the house, and we were slowly walking to the door, when we heard a very loud screaming noise. It sounded like an infant crying. It was just screaming and yelling, and the sound seemed to surround us. It was a terrible noise. It sounded human, yet not human at all. It sounded like the cry of an infant mixed with a screaming cat. It was an unpleasant noise. It did not sound of this world. Helen ran back to me, and we started to quickly walk away. We stopped and realized we shouldn't let this thing scare us away. So we walked back and knocked on the door. No one answered. So we left. We got back to her car and reflected on what just happened again. We drove back to his house, instead of walking. One last time. We parked in front of his house, and we looked for that thing that we seen before. And yes, it was there still. Except this time, it was still. It was just standing there. It looked kind of like it was searching for something on the ground slowly. It looked discouraged. It's weird how it stayed in the same place to me. Right before we were going to leave, Helen got a text from her boyfriend asking us if we could come over. How weird is that? We were already there. We were at his house for about an hour trying to find a way in, for almost no reason. Just because we had a bad feeling about the situation. So he was fine. He calmed down. He was returning to reality. But he said he went through hell. He was almost in tears because of how scared he was. Helen ended up taking me home that night. I was so happy to be in the safety of my own home. A few days later, Helen and I met up, because we needed to talk about everything that happened that night. We needed to just clarify everything, and we did. She then told me one thing that really freaked me out. She said that her boyfriend almost killed himself that night, that he was so far gone that he almost killed himself to escape the terror. I was just shocked at that, because to me, that explained why that thing didn't want us near the house. I was bewildered. That night taught me not to be afraid in certain situations. Even if you are terrified out of your mind, you shouldn't back down from anything that you feel needs to be done. I still cannot really believe that this all happened. There were tons of coincidences, like the fact that no one could hang out that night except her and I. It's like we were meant to go through with all of that.
Number 3.
It has taken me quite a while to work up the resolve to type this story. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jedediah. I'm 28 years old, and I live in American Canyon, California. This story is not a ghost story. At least I don't think it is. But it is an account of my first brush with the paranormal. I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. I always have been. And one day my belief was fortified. That day was when I saw what I believed to be a hellhound. This occurrence took place 3 days after my 25th birthday, about the middle of summer. It was a brisk night in my hometown of American Canyon. While walking home from the local market, I hear this deafening howl. Then I catch a glimpse of what I thought was a large dog. I assumed it was just one of the many stray dogs in my neighborhood, but as I continued, I saw the same large dog. This time I got a better look at it. I was unnerved because of the dog's size and appearance. It was about the size of a small bear. The build of the dog was like that of a Rottweiler, with fur that was the darkest black I've ever seen. Like it was made of pure shadows, with piercing, glowing, red eyes. Eyes that seemed to peer into my soul. The dog's torso was tangled in what looked like barbed wire. After I saw it, the dog then darted away with incredible speed. At this point I was quite scared. I continued on my way home and I found myself dreading each corner, fearing another sighting of this hellish creature. I'd almost made it home when the beast appeared again. This time it stood directly in my path. I was frozen with fear, hair standing up on end, and I closed my eyes fearing an attack. It starts to growl, a deep, rumbling growl, one that I felt deep in my soul, one that threatens to turn my legs to jello. I don't know what compelled me to do so, but I started praying to the Lord and Jesus Christ in heaven to make this beast leave, but the growling intensified. It seemed as if the growl just pulsated through my mind, doing everything in its power to get me to stop praying. I continued to pray. I just prayed and prayed and prayed. As I continued to pray, the growl slowly dissipated. When I finally opened my eyes, all that was left with scorch marks where the dog stood. I was terrified and shaking as I rushed home and locked the door. But when I turn around, I am greeted by a pitch-black dog, but this one I am sure means me no harm. It is my black Labrador, Maya. After the night I had, I just wanted nothing more than to relax and think about what happened. So I turn on the TV for some background noise. And when it starts up, I see a show on Animal Planet called Lost Tapes. The episode was about hellhounds, and what they were describing sounded eerily similar to what I encountered. To this day, I've yet to see the same dog, or another like it. So this begs the question, what did I see? A hellhound? A spectral creature? Some sort of demon? I never will know. But then again, I'm not sure I want to.
Number 4.
My story took place on September 24th, 2012, and began just at midnight. Since you don't know me, I'll fill you in on an important fact for your further understanding of what happened. I'm a 25-year-old woman who was born with the asthma allergy, and I've not had asthma attacks for about 12 years prior to this past December and January. So, the 23rd of September was a fairly typical day for me. A typical day meaning my usual wake up in the morning, check on my daughter, get ready for the day, give my daughter a diaper change, something to eat, and put her Super Wide cartoons on so I can focus on house cleaning. We had a good day that was fairly uneventful, save for one of our friends stopping by who hangs out with us throughout the week to play video games and chat about martial arts and life events and lessons. The day went on comfortably as my fiancé and I put my daughter to sleep and cuddled up to watch some movies. He had been working most of the day, so we headed off to the bedroom around 11:30 that night. I turned the movie off, but started to notice I was getting a tight feeling in my chest. For those with asthma, you may well know that this is the time to start specific breathing exercises and making home remedies if your emergency inhaler is not nearby or is empty. I hadn't had any serious breathing issues since my inhaler ran out of medicine, and was just waiting on a financially good time to get another one. For those who don't know, in cases like this, you can stretch to open up the chest muscles, drink black coffee to temporarily help you breathe, drink honey tea and beware of using lemon juice, because they may actually cause your condition to worsen. If you don't have someone around you, you may invest in a massage chair to open the airways through muscle relaxation. In my situation, it was the middle of the night, and I simply drank black coffee and chatted with a friend online until the caffeine wore off. The coffee made me comfortable enough to breathe just enough to get to sleep for about an hour. I woke up struggling for air off and on every hour of the night, up to my fiancé's alarm clock going off. He had to go to work, but I knew he was getting off early that day, so I figured I could control my asthma until we could get to a pharmacy. Needless to say, I had a very trying and difficult day. Just attempting to maneuver around and take care of my daughter was an extremely painful experience. I didn't realize I was coming down with a seriously high fever because of my focus on breathing. When I took care of my daughter that morning, I decided to look online to find out what all can trigger asthma reactions. Thanks to a Michigan website about asthma, I learned that I was surrounded by asthma triggers, and I slowly moved about my bedroom and living room, placing most of these items in a box. Dust and mold are triggers as well, so I took wet paper towels and wiped down as many surfaces as I could, before feeling too much pain to do much more than sit and rest with a cup of water. These few things took me from about 7 a.m. to 11:45 a.m. to finish, at which point I decided to contact my fiancé at work to let him know we needed to buy my inhaler refill. But I think he didn't fully realize just how badly I needed it at this point. He said we would get it when he got home from work. I knew he was supposed to just be working until 3 o'clock, so I figured I could handle waiting that little bit longer for him to get home. By the time 2:15 p.m. rolled around, I was in tears of pain, wheezing heavily, and telling myself over and over it's just a little while longer. I decided to put on a movie as I figured he would be home or at least off work by the time the movie was over, and would serve as a good distraction from my breathing issue. Again, if you don't have asthma, you can imagine focusing on your breath when it feels like no matter how much air you try to pull in, you just can't get enough to breathe regularly. If you can imagine, trying to breathe through a coffee mixer straw is about how it feels, and you're gulping as deep of breaths as you can. Because I tend to overly focus on the amount of air I'm drawing in, a little distraction like a movie is useful as it helps me to have a more regular breathing pattern, even when my airways are actually constricted and inflamed. Well, 4 p.m. is the next time I remember seeing my wall clock, and I was desperate for my inhaler at this point but couldn't talk very clearly. so I sent a text to the landline number at his work, asking them to let him know we need to pick up my inhaler from the pharmacy soon. I also sent him emails, Facebook messages, and instant messages until I finally got a hold of him at 5 p.m. Keep in mind, I had been having progressively worse asthma attack symptoms as well as a high fever at this point. I got a hold of him and told him he needed to come home because I really needed him, and, come to find out, he was in the library at his work. He works at a college, trying to print the forms I need to re-enroll in college. So add my side of furiousness to his seriously misplaced priority, as he did not realize how direly urgent the situation had become, and I had to swear at him in an email for him to snap out of his just got off work, slow down for the day mode, and get him to head home. I think he must have ran home at this point because he was at the door just minutes later. He tried to have a little conversation with me, and I just handed him the phone and forced out the words, "Have you found a ride yet?" We don't have a vehicle, and while a bus could get us to the pharmacy, it would have been too late going that route. So we immediately shut up and called one of our really good friends, who always shows up then when there is an emergency we need help with. That call lasted maybe 1 minute, and about 4 minutes later our friend showed up and took my fiancée to the pharmacy. I just realized I left out where I called the pharmacy to have the prescription filled by 3 p.m. Naturally, I was stuck on the couch in pain, gasping for air, and trying to calm my daughter, begging for God to help me breathe until he got back. In all the mayhem, I caught a glimpse of something in my bedroom. It made me stop thinking about the situation for a moment, and try clearing tears from my face to see what I was noticing. Not so shocked as just plain interested. I looked up from my tears and saw what looked like a solid black statue in the shape of what we see as an angel, which looks like the shape of a human, but with wings not like feathery wings, but more like solid black, almost metallic looking wings. This unidentified creature was just facing me, completely inanimate, yet with a presence that was like a peaceful warning. It did not have either a positive nor negative vibe about it, but more of an observer's vibe. Like what I saw was only meant to watch what was going on, not start it or stop it, or in any way interfere. Except it seemed to almost let me know it was there. I immediately thought I had seen the angel who does, not so much brain death, as the angel who observes the dying of the physical body. Naturally, my reaction was, "No, not now. Please, God, I'm not ready. Please, my fiancé, get home." And shortly after thinking this, it was like the spirit was partially in my bedroom and had moved a little out of view. Almost like the way a person would move towards someone they were talking to in another room, but to where you can still see part of them. Except again, the being still appeared to be lifeless, and not moving, even though I saw it in two different positions. After focusing on prayer and no longer looking towards this being, I kept looking out the window, just hoping my fiancé would return soon. I guess the line at the pharmacy was decently long because he was not back until about 5:45 p.m., handing me the bag with my inhaler and rushing to the restroom. Ironically enough, our restroom is through our bedroom, and behind its own door right where the being was observing, and that was indirectly the first place my fiancé went when he got here. Lord knows I want to go to heaven someday, but it's going to be very difficult for me to let go of my family when my time comes. And all I ask is to see my children grow just a little more before that time.
Number 5.
I am 27 years old, and I live in Ontario, Canada. I lived in a semi-detached house with my father, mother, little sister, and baby brother. We moved to that house 17 years ago, and everything was going great. I was as happy as I could have been, finally in a house at the backyard to play in, grass tickling my toes, the fresh smell of lilacs nearby. No more apartments. It was exciting. I shared a room with my sister and we had bunk beds. She had the top bunk and I had the bottom. We had our bed set up where our headboards were along one part of the corner and the right side of our bed was against the other. Our bedroom door was in the same wall as our headboards. It was a night like any other night. We brushed our teeth, put our PJs on, gave our parents a goodnight kiss, and headed off to bed. We kept our bedroom door open for some lighting that came from a nightlight that was plugged in the hallway. I was fast asleep until I had the strange feeling that something was in the room watching me. I opened my eyes and turned my head to look at my left, and to my horror there was something there, right up against the side of my bed. It was all black from what I could see. It had long pointed ears that stuck up from the top of its round head, large glowing red eyes, and its claw-like hands were resting on the edge. I'm not sure as to how tall the creature was, but all I could see was from the chest up. As soon as it noticed that I was looking at it, it smiled at me. A massive smile with sharp, pointed yellow teeth. It dug its claw-like hands into the bedding and just kept smiling. My heart started to race, and my breathing intensified. I couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't scream. The creature knew it had me trapped, and it smiled even wider. I was so scared that tears started to blur my vision. I had to do something. I had to move. Then all of a sudden, for some reason, I was able to pull the covers over my head and turn away from it. I kept whispering ever so softly, "Go away, go away." And just like that, I was out cold once again. When I awoke the following morning, my head was throbbing, and it felt wet at the back. I placed my hand on the area and a wave of burning pain came rushing in. I looked at my hand and was covered in blood. I ran to the kitchen crying to my father as he was preparing us breakfast. He noticed the blood on my hands and asked if I had fallen out of bed. He took a look at the back of my head and was in shock at the amounts of blood. He rushed me to the bathroom and washed off as much as he could. My father told me there were tiny gashes forming into what looked like teeth marks. He brought me to the hospital right away and had a doctor take a look at it. The doctor had no idea as to what it was, or what could have caused it, but it indeed looked like a bite. He explained to my father that it was very badly infected and that stitches weren't needed. I was given some sort of ointment for it and had to place it on the wound twice a day, every day. After a couple of weeks or so, chunks of my scalp started coming off and produced such an awful smell that went on for almost 6 years. My family and I moved out of that house 4 years after that night, and not once did I see it again. Well, until the first night in our new home, that is. I had my own room now. My bed was in a corner again, but the left side was against the wall. The window was across the room to my right, and my bedroom door was near the foot of my bed. I was asleep, and once again I had that feeling something was watching me. I opened my eyes, sat up right away, and noticed that creature again. This time it was outside my house, sitting on a tree branch looking right at me. I just sat there for a few minutes, and I was able to get a better look at its form. It appeared to be about 3 feet in height, and almost humanoid. Its left arm was resting on the branch slightly above it, with the right one at its side. The legs were swinging back and forth, and then it jumped out of the tree in just a flash. I ran over to the window as quickly as possible, and closed the curtains, then ran back to my bed and hid under the blankets again. That was the last time I saw it, and it bothers me not knowing what it was.
Hello everyone, Hollowkeez here. Turns out that I had my USB cable unplugged during every single story in this video, and I didn't even notice until I was all done. So, my other mic must have recorded the audio. Sorry guys. I'll make sure I won't make such a mistake again. This outro was recorded using it though. I hope it sounds good. If you want, leave your opinion in the comment section below on how this outro audio sounds compared to the rest of the audio in the story section of this video. You know, I had the USB cable plugged in earlier, but for some reason I unplugged it and I forgot that I did when I started recording, so again, I'm very sorry. Anyway, beside all that, if you're new, make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And thank you very much to all those who regularly watch my videos. It is really something knowing that the time I put into these things is worth something. I should also mention, if any of you have any interesting personal stories you want me to tell, send it to my personal email. I'll put it in the description of all future videos from now on. If it's fear you're after, welcome home.